Preparing for the lecture this evening has been for me something of a nostalgia trip, recalling people, places, and events of the 1970s that went by too fast at the time. Working for FOE, caught up in controversies about North Sea oil and nuclear power, I realized that I had better do some serious homework. When it came to energy as an environmental issue, I had a lot to learn. Not only about the science and the technology, but also about the economics, the finances, the planning, and the policy. That was why in 1974, I joined the newly established UK section of the International Solar Energy Society. And how I first met David Hall, Mary Archer, George Porter, Brian Brinkworth, Bernard McNellis, June Morton, and other solar energy friends and colleagues. I was reminded this evening of several other names that I hadn't thought of, I have to confess, for years. I was delighted to know that John Page is still with us. Very good news. As well as solar energy, I tried to learn about wind energy, wave energy, geothermal energy, cogeneration, and cleaner ways to use coal. I also began to think about how and why we use all this energy. At the time, I could not have imagined how much I would need to learn about energy. Now, I can hardly believe how much we all need to learn in a hurry while we still can. Half a century ago, it was so simple. Those responsible were expanding the high voltage electricity network as fast as possible. People wanted the electricity. But as for the pylons, they declared stoutly and literally, not in my backyard. That was the origin of NIMBY. They objected to the visual intrusion and inconvenience, and they insisted, put it somewhere else. Sometimes they won the argument, more often not. But that was as far as it went. Matters rapidly grew more complicated. Soon people began to object not only individually, but in groups. Opposing proposals to dam wild rivers for hydroelectricity, for instance in California and in Norway, opponents argued not just put it somewhere else, but don't do it at all. They were no longer defending only individual turf, but what they saw as a common interest under threat. Of course, what they saw as a threat, the project promoters saw as a necessity, essential for future electricity supply and as a source of revenue. That conflict has intensified ever since. The people objecting also changed. The original NIMBYs objected because they were directly and immediately affected, to their detriment, by a proposed development. Soon, however, people were objecting essentially on principle, not because they experienced any direct disadvantage, but because they simply did not like what was happening, for one reason or another. In the 1960s and thereafter, that of course was true not only for environmental issues, but for right across society in many parts of the world. The phenomenon of public protest is material not just for an evening, but for a career. Tonight, I want to focus on the particular subset we've come to call energy campaigning. NIMBYs were not and are not energy campaigners, as I would use the expression. Even in the hectic winter of 1973-74, amid the first energy crisis, my colleagues and I in FOE recognized that to campaign effectively on any aspect of energy, or indeed on any environmental issue, simply not liking what was happening was not good enough. We had to understand clearly what was happening and why. Clearly somebody thought a particular proposal made sense. Somebody wanted it to happen. How good was their argument? What were the counter-arguments? Which case was stronger? Only if we could articulate a strong case against the proposal could we campaign effectively to oppose it. That applied to all FOE's campaigns against packaging waste, against killing whales, against importing endangered species, and for me as an energy campaigner, against concrete oil production platforms in the Highlands, and against American nuclear reactors, plutonium reprocessing, fast breeder reactors. Everyone has long since forgotten, for example, how the conservative government, backed by the oil companies and the construction companies, proposed to nationalize coastal sites in Scotland to build vast concrete oil production platforms for North Sea oil. Friends of the Earth joined local people and the National Trust for Scotland to oppose the plan to demolish 13 houses in a place called Drumbuie, opposite the Isle of Skye. In my evidence to the Drumbuie inquiry, I said that FOE analysis showed that if the government plans went ahead, within 5 years, we would have derelict platform sites all around Scotland. As it turned out, I was wrong. It was only 3 years. But we defenders of Drumbuie did win our case. That was another important feature of energy campaigning, as we did it. We would only launch a campaign if we could make our case clear-cut and convincing. We did not waste effort on heroic, futile gestures. When we launched a campaign, we expected to win. Often enough we did, but not always, especially about the nuclear issues that dominated my years with FOE. Writing the piece on radioactive waste had awakened my curiosity. I plunged into an intensive study on nuclear matters. I quickly learned enough about nuclear power to become seriously skeptical about it. I already spoke the language well enough not to be dazzled by the prevailing impression that only experts could make decisions about nuclear technology. The whole idea of leaving public policy in a democratic society to be decided by experts made me profoundly uneasy. The experts declared that the only reason people were concerned about nuclear power was because they didn't understand it. For my part, the more I learned about nuclear power, the more concerned I became. In that hectic autumn of 1973, the Central Electricity Generating Board, the CEGB, the government-owned monopoly operator of the power stations and transmission lines in England and Wales, revealed that it wanted to switch to American nuclear power stations instead of British designs. It soon declared, moreover, that it wanted to order in the next 10 years 32 reactors, larger than any yet operating anywhere in the world. The CEGB was then one of the most powerful and influential bodies in the United Kingdom. We, at Friends of the Earth, were not the only ones who thought that the CEGB had lost its marbles.